Good if we could shuffle up, maybe everybody could move a little bit to that side, we'll get another row in there. Does anybody else need any cushions?
Just stand here. Talk to yourself.
So hello everyone, welcome. If you've just arrived to this day, we started at 10 o'clock this morning and we've been warming it all up for you. And for Subhuti is giving our keynote talk. And my name is Suri Gupta. I'm the chair of the London Buddhist Centre, and it's my pleasure to welcome Subhuti to our whole day celebration that we've been having. Subhuti is the president of the London Buddhist Centre and was also its first chair and helped found the centre. So out of everyone in this room, in fact everyone that I know, he's had the longest involvement, most continuous involvement with the London Buddhist Centre. He's very much, involved in and responsible for who we are today as a community. And he's been with us all week, and he's been exploring with us, or sharing with us, the Guru Padmasambhava, his life and legacy, and really helping us to get into a relationship really with, what was it called, transforming the demons, although he clarified it's taming the demons, taming the forces that hold us back, and forces that hold us back, that hold the world back, really, from being able to live in a way that is actually loving and wise and generous and actually conducive to freedom from suffering. So he was really helping us, he was evoking Padmasambhava for us and helping us have a different relationship really to how we normally live, the way we normally construct life, the way we normally, the rigid way, the limited way that we engage with life. And he was really in helping us to kind of see a different way of relating to the life within us, the life that's out there, the life that's seen, the life that's not seen, the kind of mysterious nature of the life that we actually are inhabiting. And so that's what we've been exploring all week. Subhuti's been helping us do that. And today he's going to be looking at Padmasambhava as a guru. So what is a guru? How is he our guru? And many other questions, I'm sure, that he's going to be exploring with us. So thank you very much, Subhuti, for being here. And I just want to say, before you start, that it's just been a pleasure to have you with us. Not just because you've been helping us have a more direct relationship with Padmasambhava, but for the friendship that you've been sharing with us all, those of us involved. And you really feel the energy, the kind of he's helped rouse our energy, and with love and warmth, and I really want to appreciate you for that. Thank you.
Need to keep an eye on the time, otherwise I'll be here all night. So, thank you very much indeed, Suri Gupta, for that welcome. And I'm very pleased indeed to see so many people coming to celebrate the life of the great Guru Padmasambhava. I realise sitting here that I feel a certain amount of trepidation. First of all, talking about Guru Padmasambhava is really beyond my reach, perhaps beyond all our reach. He's a figure of such majesty and mystery, although at the same time he's very definite and clear. It's quite difficult to talk about him. I'm also very aware that I'm sitting on a particular spot where 42 years ago, our teacher, the founder of our order, sat on a Padmasambhava day and gave a very important, very memorable talk. I was sitting just about where Surya Gupta is. And I was chair at that time, so that's obviously the chair's chair. And I could see Bhante very clearly. He was sitting on the ground. And the room was probably as full as it is now, if not fuller, just about a year after the opening of the centre. And he came down to lead the Padmasambhava Day celebrations and to give the talk. And there are few talks that Bhante has given that I can say the talk itself changed me. Some of you will have heard the talks on the Sutra of Golden Light or the Vimalakirti Nirdesha. And I remember going to those talks from here, from the LBC, we were doing the building work here, and leaving at the end of the series, a changed man with a much greater understanding of what we were doing, especially where the series on the Sutra of Golden Light was concerned, with a much greater understanding of the power of the Dhamma to transform society. And for me, that formed a basis for a lot of my work, a lot of my interest, and indeed formed a basis for what we were trying to do here at the LBC. We realised that we weren't just opening up a centre for people to get a little bit of meditation. We were doing something that was radical and transformative, we hoped, for the world itself, not to put it too grandly. But this particular talk, it sort of struck me in a very different way. In some ways, I can't quite remember what he said. I've sort of dredged it out of my mind. But it wasn't the talk that struck me. It was what Sangharakshita, Bhante as we call him, evoked. He managed during the course of that talk to bring Guru Padmasambhava right into our lives here and now. And a very unusual talk because Sangharakshita was a very careful man. He never gave a talk without great preparation. In fact, most of his talks were pretty much written out. You wouldn't know it when he was speaking because he was a master rhetorician. He knew exactly how to make something that had been pre-planned seem completely spontaneous and alive. A really extraordinary capacity to talk in that way. But this one was very unusual because he just had some notes. I was sitting there, so I could see his notes. And I think there were 3 words. That's all there was. And so in the course of this, I suppose you could say, spontaneous talk, he managed to communicate something of the spirit of Guru Padmasambhava in a very alive, very dynamic way. Afterwards, we were all, full of praise and so forth. And he was saying, I don't think I was at my best. Because, of course, he hadn't prepared it properly. But we all thought that this sort of spontaneous, direct communication was much more effective. Anyway, he wouldn't change his views, we wouldn't change ours. So, sitting here, I think, I wish it was Bhante sitting here and that you were able to listen to him talking about this extraordinary man, Guru Rinpoche, Guru Padmasambhava. He's referred to in Tibet as Guru Rinpoche. Rinpoche means greatly precious. In fact, they'd call him Lama Rinpoche, Lama being the Tibetan for Guru, the Sanskrit Guru. So Bhante has a very close connection with Guru Padmasambhava. And in some ways, I think he's sort of identified with him, you could say. And from a very early period in his engagement with the Dhamma in India, he encountered the figure of Guru Padmasambhava in a temple in Darjeeling, a temple which Tamang Buddhists from the border regions had set up. And I've seen this image myself. It's a huge figure seated in a temple which has 2 more stories above it with other figures in those other stories. I won't go into all of that, but he describes the impact as instant, that even though he'd never seen this figure before, he felt it had always been in his life, and that it was a powerful presence for him. So I presume that over these days and over the day, if you've been paying attention, you'll have learnt something of the story of Guru Padmasambhava. I'll very, very quickly recapitulate that story. If you want to know more, then listen to those lectures that were given in the past, and some being given probably right now. So he was an Indian prince, it's said. They're always princes, aren't they? And at a very early age, he gained a strong inclination to the Dhamma, and cut a very long story short, he engaged in very intensive practice. And at a certain point in his life, he was invited to come to Tibet. As I've been saying in the talks I've given earlier in the week, he was invited because nobody could do what needed to be done. An Indian guru had been invited. Shantarakshita was his name. He was the great abbot of Nalanda University. His Nalanda Monastery is a huge site. If you've ever been there in Bihar, just north of Bodh Gaya, you can still see that the massive site covering acres. And they say that there could have been 10,000 monks and nuns there. It taught, of course, all the different schools of Buddhism extant at that time, and many other arts. Medicine, for instance, would have been taught there. Rhetoric would have been taught there. Grammar, etc. So it was a true university, and it's said to be one of the earliest universities in human history. And it's said that scholars from all over the world, from particularly China and elsewhere in the Indian sphere, Indonesia, even some from the Greco-Bactrian kingdoms in the northwest. Fascinating, there were Greek kingdoms in the northwest which were the descendants of Alexander's invasion. And they were amongst the foremost followers of the Buddha. So they would have been there. So there would have been Europeans there, for those of us that matters to. They would have been there. So it's an extraordinarily rich and fertile training ground. So this great abbot of Nalanda was invited to Tibet to establish Buddhism there on a firm footing. So, of course, the first thing he needed to do was create a monastery where they could establish a monastic sangha. But, as the story goes, they would build during the day, and then the local forces, the local malicious deities and spirits, would cast it down at night. That's the story. If you want to know more about that, 3 lectures were given last week on this topic and exactly what it means. So even though it's a tempting story to retell, I'm not going to do so now. And they sent for Guru Padmasambhava. He arrived. He did a dance on the site. Isn't that wonderful? He did a dance, and as a result of that dance, of course, it wasn't an ordinary dance, he tamed these unruly spirits of Tibet. And he spent the next, probably, I think they think, he spent between 18 months and 3 years in Tibet. Not very long at all. And he went round Tibet taming these malicious spirits and binding them to the Dharma. So they became protectors of the Dharma, supporters of the Dharma, rather than being its opponents. So we made quite a lot of that and made some meaning out of that earlier in the week, and I'm not going to do that now. At the end of that time, the story tells us that he flew away to a Pure Land called the Copper Mountain. This is his own special sort of realm. Again, I'm not going to explain what all that means, but Buddhas and enlightened beings are able to form on a kind of visionary plane, it's said, a kind of an ideal world into which their followers may be reborn, where they will hear the Dhamma and gain liberation. So Guru Padmasambhava flew away to the copper-coloured mountain. But he left a resonance in Tibet that echoes to this very day and has, of course, since the 1950s, since many Tibetans left Tibet because of the Chinese takeover, it's now become kind of worldwide. They're found everywhere. Guru Padmasambhava is found everywhere. His story is really semi-mythical. We don't know much about the true history, as it were, true history in our dull, materialist sense. Where he was born, and this is his house, and these were his parents, and so forth. We really don't truly know much of the detail of his life. We're pretty sure that he did live. Sangharakshita himself, Bhante, compared him to King Arthur. We sort of think there probably was a figure like King Arthur who did fight off the barbarians as long as he could, but we don't really know whether he was a single figure or a composite figure, and so on. And attempts have been made to discover where where Camelot was and so on, but we don't really know. So Padmasambhava is probably a little bit more certain than that, but not a great deal more. He almost certainly lived. He almost certainly did come to Tibet, and he almost certainly had a huge impact in founding firmly the Tibetan Buddhist tradition in the form that we know it today, at least the basis for it. But at some point, myth and history began to coalesce. I've been recently reading biographies and autobiographies by some of our teachers' teachers and their teachers, and they don't say all the things that you want them to say. Like my mummy was a bit nasty with me, so I ended up with some anxieties and uncertainties and so forth. You don't hear all the psychological history. You don't hear about all the struggles and so forth. You just have all their initiations, all their teachers, and all their mystical experiences, which are told in a completely realistic way. So the Tibetans, and no doubt this was simply a continuation of the traditions in India, did not make this hard and fast distinction between myth and history. And they probably felt that myth was truer in many ways than history. So that when you talk about somebody from a historical point of view, do you really know them? But when you talk about them from a mythic point of view, well, you know something more of what they are from an inner point of view, an inward point of view, and what they are on another plane, on another level. So yes, history and myth coalesce, collide, I was going to say, in the life of Guru Padmasambhava. And we have a massive tome, The Life and Liberation of Guru Padmasambhava, which details in very colourful and elaborate terms his taming of demon after demon after demon and binding them to support the Dharma. And his life, therefore, is not one that we can read down in exactly historical terms. So this, I think, illustrates a very interesting principle, the relationship between history and myth. I've been thinking about this quite a bit with some of the archetypal Buddhas and Bodhisattvas that many of you will be familiar with, even with the archetypal Buddha figure. This really represents the Buddha Amitabha. Buddha Amitabha, as far as we know, had no historical existence, but he represents a reality, a truth that is beyond the historical. So what you find as the Buddhist tradition unfolds, the mythic dimension is able to manifest on the quasi-historical plane more and more vividly. I recently read an academic's account of how the image of Avalokiteshvara, the very great, very famous, very important bodhisattva of compassion, how that figure arose. I'm not going to tell you the story, even though it's fascinating. But there's you could quite easily understand how certain iconography connected with the life of the Buddha began to take on a separate life. So you could say that sort of explains Avalokiteshvara away. Oh, he's made up. He doesn't really exist. But it's not like that. It's that there is a transcendental reality, a reality that goes beyond the mundane, goes beyond the conditioned world, that is, as it were, waiting for the chance to earth itself. A bit like lightning, lightning electricity building up in the clouds, and then eventually it finds some point that enables it to go to earth. I live in the mountains in Wales, what we call mountains in Wales, big hills to the Austrians. even smaller hills to the North Indians. But, occasionally you see these huge storms coming, and you'll see this great jagged flash of light hitting the top of the mountain, because it's looking for a point to earth itself. So you could say, as a metaphor, that the ultimate reality beyond everything conditioned, is sort of waiting to connect with the mundane. It takes a Buddha, first of all, to make that connection. But once that connection has been made, more and more of the circumstances, the propitious circumstances, are being built up so that lightning can strike, transcendental lightning can strike. So something about that figure, that historical figure, that almost certainly historical figure of the Indian guru, became the lightning rod for a transcendental reality, so that he became, the figure became something that was quasi-historical, but also, as it were, cosmic, also beyond the real in our flat, everyday, dull, boring sense, although it has some value as well. Facts do matter, but facts themselves are not enough. They need to be animated, that word again, by something that is beyond the merely factual. So when we're talking about Guru Padmasambhava, we're talking not so much about a historical figure and a historical life story. We're talking about the eruption into the mundane of something transcendental. An eruption is just the right word where Guru Padmasambhava is concerned. He's just suddenly there in front of you, very decisively, very definitely, and very powerfully there in front of you. So what, if you like, does he represent? Well, he represents what he is. Do you see what I mean? If we're asking what does he represent, we're already sort of trying to pull him too far down. Like when we say, oh, Avalokiteshvara is the Bodhisattva of compassion, we think we've got Avalokiteshvara, but we haven't. Avalokiteshvara is something transcendent. It's not that Avalokiteshvara is very kind but a bit stupid, and you need a bit of a Manjushri who's very wise but rather cold-hearted. Each of them is a transcendental reality, which, as it were, manifests an aspect of a multifaceted jewel. And yes, that you look from one facet into the heart of the jewel, but all those other facets are there too. It's just that you approach through that particular facet. So what if we have to put a label on him, what does he really represent? Well, it's said what he represents is the archetypal guru. He represents the guru principle, and he represents the guru principle in its most principial form, in its chemically pure form, in its neat form in the whiskey sense, without any dilution. He's absolute guru. Oh, that's a nice phrase. Absolute guru. Nothing but guru. And so that requires us to really examine what a guru is and what a guru does. Well, perhaps in a way, I've already given you a clue, or given myself a cue for a song, in talking about the effect that being here in this shrine room 42 years ago, down there, and listening to Bhante talk about Guru Padmasambhava, the effect that had on me. There were times in my life, in my contact with Bhante, and I had extensive contact with him over many, many years, and I knew him as an ordinary human being, and as even a flawed human being at times. But I also knew him as a guru. I knew moments when he burst through to me, when what he said or what he did or what he was broke down my barriers and lifted me up onto another level. Of course, in a way, it wasn't he lifted me up. The Guru doesn't do it to you, but being in the presence of the Guru at its archetypal level does it for you. You're raised up. I think probably everybody's had some experience of this, some experience like this in more ordinary settings. Maybe you've spent time with a friend when you're very, very down. Sometimes we do get down, don't we? And you see a friend who is able to communicate with you in a way that you feel at the time they've lifted you out of it. Of course, they haven't lifted you out of it, literally. It's not a magical act. Wow, well, maybe it is. But it's more that being in their presence sort of sparks something off in you. It reminds you of something. It lifts you up. Maybe it reminds you of something you never knew. And you experience yourself in quite a new way, or an old way that you'd kind of slipped out of. That a good friend has that function for one. A very good teacher, at school or university, some of them, very rarely, can have that power. That when you're with them, the doors open and you see things more vividly. Maybe even one could think of art. One could think of looking at a painting, for instance, and suddenly your eyes change. You see the world in a very different way. I was just talking to somebody who was born in Singapore, and I remember going to an art gallery in Singapore, and it was a bit, formulaic. That's what we did at that point. We were being shown the sights of Singapore. Weird, we're being shown the sights of Singapore and then going to see French Impressionist paintings. But I remember going around slightly reluctantly, out of politeness, after all I am English, and looking at the paintings somewhat desultorily. And we were looking at a painting by Pissarro of a French port. And I was looking at it, sort of formulaically casting my eye upon it, and suddenly it came out at me. And it wasn't just a French port, it was a sort of portion of reality revealed. And suddenly my eyes just cleared. And, looking around, everything I saw in the way that Pissarro saw. So, we've got that analogy with art. With music can suddenly transport you into another realm. One of my favourite quotations is of the great Handel. After the first performance of the Messiah, an English aristocrat came up to me and said, "By God, Handel, that was a damned entertaining." And Handel said, in a rather gruff German, said, I wrote it, I'm not going to attempt a German accent, I wrote it not to entertain you, but to make you better. So for him, it was a medium of communication of another realm. And after all, who can resist the Hallelujah chorus? Even however hackneyed it is, you go into heaven, don't you? Yes, we've got all those analogies of the function of the Guru, as it were, on more ordinary levels. Just an ordinary friend, just clapping you on the back, smiling in your face and saying, "Cheer up." It can be infuriating, of course, but sometimes it can be just what you need in order to lift you up into another world, another perspective. So please do come in. Yeah. So yes, the Guru function is one that's not unfamiliar to us from our ordinary experience. But of course, in the context we're now talking, it's something to the power of infinity. It's that on another level altogether. They rip apart the veils of conditionality so that you see the real nature of things, even if it's only for an instant. Your eyes are cleansed, and you see things as they are, at least for an instant. And so the function of the Guru par excellence, the Guru par excellence being Guru Padmasambhava, is to burst through your mundane protections, your defences, by which you keep your sense of yourself, your sense of your identity going. Just burst through it with a glimpse of reality, so that you are a different person, at least for a little while. And as I say, I've experienced this many times with Sangharakshita. I've experienced times when I'm with him and I ended up bored. I've experienced times when I ended up confused. I've experienced times when I've ended up not agreeing with him. But I've certainly experienced many times when I've gone to see him and ended up a different man. Not necessarily because of anything he said or did, but of something that sort of communicated itself to me. Sometimes, for instance, I would go with issues that I wanted to discuss, maybe issues connected with the movement, issues sometimes connected with myself. And usually by the time I got inside the door, I couldn't even remember what they were, because being with him was its own answer. Other people have said that to me, that you can't remember why you were there, because he is the answer. He's on another level, at least at that point. So that's the Guru function. The Guru bursts through to us. In the case of Guru Padmasambhava, this is distinctively put in the tradition that he founded, which he, after all, brought from India. It was the pinnacle of the development, the evolution of Indian Buddhism, was the experience of mindfulness, you could say, that's the way I see it. The experience of mindfulness is its absolute peak. So it's absolute mindfulness. You're aware, absolute awareness, with no adulteration, no effort. You're simply effortlessly aware of reality. In the tradition that he came from, this was spoken of mainly in terms of seeing the nature of mind, the nature of awareness, what awareness really is. We, according to this tradition, we exist in a false construction of ourselves, a false construction that is ourselves. We misunderstand our experience and we make of it a solid, fixed I in a solid, unchanging world outside us. Of course, it changes superficially, but fundamentally the world is outside there. And we're like a sort of doll put inside a box. The box is real, the doll is real. And we kind of live within that. We have sense awareness. That's the origin of all other forms of awareness. When we open our eyes, we see. We have a kind of functioning mind that uses the data of our experience and organizes it into a world, an interpreted world. But what this tradition says, what Guru Padmasambhava says, is this isn't mind, or rather, it's mind not as it really is. This is mind as it's been sort of distorted and formed up by our craving, by our attachment, an attachment from beginningless time. Again and again and again, we've craved identity. We've craved being an I in a body, in a world. Even if it's a dreadful world, we'd rather be in one than not be in one. So what this tradition is telling us is that this is not really what mind is. This is only our superficial experience of what mind is. Mind is not really mine. If you really understand mind, there's no I in it. This doesn't mean it's just a big blank and it's a big blob, as it were, wandering around in space, whatever that would be. It's an awareness without any identity. No observer, nothing observed, nothing fixed observed, but pure observation, Guru Padmasambhava says in one of his works that's reputed to come from him, but that's a complicated story. We don't actually have any literally of his direct words. We have what later disciples found and said were coming from him. It's another whole story which we won't go into. So he represents that tradition that argues that if we only understood this present awareness, we would realize this present awareness is free from I. It's free from self. It's free, therefore, from craving. It's free from hatred. It's free from the petty pains that we experience in this life. It's free from all sense of separation. It's free from antagonism. It's just free. The mind that the Buddha experienced under the Bodhi tree. So what Guru Padmasambhava and his tradition argues is that if we could only see mind as it really is, we would be free. Perhaps mind is a misleading word, isn't it? Because it immediately connotes mental processes, if you see what I mean. So maybe one needs to distinguish sense awareness from mental processes from mind itself or consciousness itself, awareness itself. I think I prefer awareness to mind because awareness is dynamic and mind is sort of suggests something out there, whereas awareness is an activity. It's more like awareing, if you see what I mean. So awareing, if we could only see it in our present moment of awareness, which is constructed in terms of sense awareness and mental processes, if we could only see that as it really is, we would see it's completely free. The analogy that's often made is with the blue sky. It's like the infinite blue sky without any obstruction. And in fact, in those traditions, you're sometimes encouraged to lie on your back and just gaze at the blue sky. And it's sometimes said, merge your awareness with the blue sky, because you realize there's no difference between your mind and the blue sky. So Guru Padmasambhava is from the tradition that puts what enlightenment is in these terms. There are other ways it can be put which are perfectly valid and which are completely consistent with this, if you see what I mean. And there are places in the original scriptures which come to something very, very similar, put in different terms. But this is what he represents. The experience of naked awareness is sometimes how it's put. Naked in the sense that all the clothing that we hide ourselves in are taken away. There's just pure awareness. This doesn't mean that nothing happens. It doesn't mean that you cannot function within the world. You just become everything, a sort of, a hippie with too much dope inside them. Although sometimes it was like that, if I remember rightly. But you, in fact, you function with remarkable clarity. In one text that I love, speaks of clear images cease not. Even though you've detached yourself, so to speak, from identification with sense awareness and with mental processes, that doesn't mean sense awareness ceases or mental processes stop. After all, you've got a body, and while you've got a body, it's got senses, and those senses are going to work. But they're always contained within the blue sky. You're never out of the blue sky. So that at every moment, yes, you can enter into compassionate relations with others. You can engage with them. And you can even do something like thinking, although what this sort of thinking is, I don't know. It's sort of something very mysterious. It's not our ratiocination. It's sort of seeing immediately and clearly what needs to be said, what needs to be done, without any cogitation, you might say. This is the tradition that he came from, a tradition that sought what in Zen texts, and in one translation at least of the key text in Zen Buddhism, the Platform Sutra of Huineng, speaks of as essence of mind. One translation speaks of as essence of mind. Mind at its purest, as I say, neat mind in the whiskey sense. So this then gets us to understand a little bit better what the Guru is in its essence, what it is at its most characteristic. The Guru's function is to awaken you to the nature of mind. Not your mind, mind. Because, of course, if awareness, I'm slipping in my language, if awareness eludes self-identification, then it's not my mind or your mind. It's simply awareness. And what keeps that awareness functioning is compassion, a sense of the suffering of others and a desire to remove that suffering by awakening to the nature of mind. So the Guru's function is to awaken you to the nature of mind. When you come into interaction with the Guru, let's say, Padmasambhava, Guru Padmasambhava, representing this function, your interaction with them wakes you up to the nature of mind. It's not something they give you or they do to you. It's that in you being in relation to them and being receptive to them, sometimes you don't actually have to be receptive to them because they sort of break through your barriers somehow. Just the brilliance of the radiance just breaks through your barriers. So the function of the Guru is to awaken you to the nature of awareness itself and to free you from your imprisonment in the confines of your identification, self-identification through sense awareness and your mental processes, and of course your body as the outer casing of your sense awareness. So the Guru's function is to sort of shake you up so that you're woken up to the nature of your mind. But it's not something he does, or she does. I've been reading up on Sangharakshita's teachers and some of his teachers' teachers. And there's a very, very extraordinary woman teacher, Sarah Kandro Dewa Dorje, who lived in the early 20th century in Tibet and was the teacher of one of his teachers, Chatul Sangye Dorje. Absolutely remarkable woman with very much this sort of quality. When you met her, it was like meeting, 10 million volts without any insulation. And you're just sort of shaken up in the way that the Buddha often was able to completely shake people up. It sounds like it's something you do, but because these people are so in contact with the nature of mind, when you encounter them, you can't avoid it, as it were. If you're at all open, if you've got heavy defences, well, perhaps you won't see anything. But sometimes their presence is so powerful, it just bursts through that. So that's the Guru function par excellence, is to burst through these barriers and boundaries and to awaken you to the nature of your mind. A nature of mind, nature of awareness. I keep getting myself tangled here. The nature of awareness itself, so that you are free. You're freed from your suffering, and you experience, as that your experience of the nature of mind deepens, you find flooding through you transcendental love, transcendental compassion, transcendental bliss, because the space is opened up within which they naturally flow. So you could say again that the nature of awareness is love. The nature of awareness is compassion. The nature of awareness is bliss. It's beauty. So these awaken within you once you awaken to the nature of awareness. So that's the function of the guru. But they're pretty rare. They don't come often. And they sometimes come, or rather the guru kind of functions in somebody who's not able to be like that all the time, as it were. But at times they're able to rise to that. At times they're able to channel that. And I would say that in my own experience of Sangharakshita, of Bhante, that, I know he was not a perfect man, and he said himself that, famously, I'm much better than people think I am, and much worse. Took some thinking about. I'm still thinking about it. Because after all, what we do is we project onto other people our own understanding, if you see what I mean. We project onto them from our own limited point of view. Some of that may be quite correct. I'm not saying it's all wrong. But everybody, every person we meet, we start off with certain basic assumptions or projections or whatever. We try not to, but we inevitably do. We're looking from the point of view of our own conditioning and experience. And, it takes time for us to get beyond that. In friendship, we go beyond that. We meet each other as we really are. But yes, we project onto each other. And so, that's what we all did to poor old Sangharakshita, which is a pretty hard thing to happen to you. I know, because I've had it happen to me. And I learnt fairly early on, the more wonderful people you think you are, the longer the drop is when they realise what you're really like. And so I say, don't want to be on a high pedestal, because it's a long way to the ground and there ain't no parachute. He was a man, a human being with a personality, with a character, and maybe strengths and weaknesses and so on. It's not really for me to say much. But at times, he channeled something, you could say. He was something. And he was in contact with, I would say, he wouldn't put it like this himself, the nature of awareness. He was coming from that nature of awareness. And contact with him sort of shook one up. But you might say, well, okay, he's gone. He's dead. And even he wasn't like that all the time. So what are we left with? Dear old Subhuti. And I know you're a wise audience, so you can see through it immediately, etc. I have no pretensions to that. You go quite a long way to persuade you that wasn't the way to look at me. I can be very helpful to you, perhaps. You might be able to be helpful to me, but that's not what I'm able to do, perhaps. But where do we look for that? Well, I think this needs some unpacking. If you like, I go back to the talk that Bhante gave on that occasion 42 years ago. He distinguished between the role or function of a Buddha and of a guru. So, the Buddha lived 2,500 years ago. Padmasambhava lived in the 8th century, we think, if he lived. So why did you need a Padmasambhava if you'd already had a Buddha? Well, the way Bhante unpacked it, paraphrasing wildly, putting it in my own terms, the Buddha opened up the way. That's the cosmic function of a Buddha. It's to discover enlightenment, discover the path to enlightenment, to discover in these later terms the nature of mind, and to show how the nature of mind, the nature of awareness, is to be realized. And so the Buddha established the goal, established the reality of enlightenment. And he showed how you get there. But he lived 2,500 years ago. The teachings expanded hugely from his time. By the time of Guru Padmasambhava, there were volumes and volumes of scriptures that had evolved, the Mahayana scriptures, the Vajrayana Tantras, so many commentaries, an extraordinarily rich and varied culture had evolved from the Buddha's original teaching, which was very, very beautiful and very powerful, with very rich imagery and many, many practices that were never in the original scriptures, but which evolved from it, which are completely consistent with it. So this extraordinary plethora. And, well, the Tibetans suddenly find themselves deluged with 1,000, I can't do the mathematics, more than 1,000 years, 1,300 years, 1,300 years of the evolution of Buddhism and its very rich cultural and spiritual history in India. And they were the inheritors, the direct inheritors of that vast wealth, which suddenly began to pour in upon them over the mountains. And what to make of it? What do you do with it all? What do you follow? What do you not follow? And the function of the guru is to make it intelligible, to make it practicable for you now, to sort of build, to distill out of this great wealth an intelligible whole that is consistent with the whole of the tradition, but that applies it, makes it applicable right now. So you know when you get up in the morning what you've got to do. You know how to practice. You know what practice means. You know where it takes you. Of course, then it begins to expand from there all over again, doesn't it? Even in my time in Triratna, from that moment sitting here 42 years ago, we've got a much, much richer culture already. And that's only 40 years, 50 years from the founding. And it'll grow and expand, and because we live in a much more open world with so many other cultures and traditions available, which weren't really present in the Shrine Room 42 years ago. I doubt if there was a non-English person there. Well, maybe 2 or 3, might be a Finn or 2, but not many. Even here in London, so many people from so many different backgrounds, so many mother tongues and so on. So already that changes what the teaching is that we've developed. But we develop from the point where we've been given a distillation. Guru Padmasambhava gave the Tibetans of his time a distillation of the teachings that he inherited, what are called the old tantras, and which founded the Nyingma school, the so-called unreformed school. Although, as I mentioned the other day, one of Bante's teachers said, yes, it was unreformed because it didn't need reform, because there's a lot of rivalry between the schools. But yes, Guru Padmasambhava distilled from the traditions that came to him practicable means for individuals to make progress. He formed, as it were, or got Shantarakshita to form a curriculum of studies based on the studies at Nalanda. He gave tantric initiation and showed people an entry into the rich realm of transcendental imagination, and so on. He formed a perspective on the path that came out of the highly developed Indian Buddhism, but that was practicable for Tibetans of his time. So that was a guru function, let's say a founder's function. You might want to distinguish then between a guru and a founder, but maybe they're pretty much the same thing. And that's the function that Sangharakshita is formed to perform for us. For the first time in Buddhist history since the Buddha's own time, the whole tradition is accessible. From the mid-20th century, all the major scriptures of all the major schools had been translated into English in competent ways and were available to those who could study and read in many other parts of the world. All the different traditions were sort of aware of each other. Now it's very obvious in London. You'll find pretty well every sort of Buddhism that's now extant can be accessed here in London. Even in the 1960s, when I first was engaging with Buddhism, there were so many different groups, usually with a Tibetan or Chinese or Japanese or Thai or Burmese teacher, transmitting those traditions. So for the first time, you couldn't just just sort of devote yourself to one school or practice, particularly because those schools or practice traditions came from a culture that was different to our own, as we were exploring this last week. And so, and when I say a culture that's different from my own, I mean a culture that we all share insofar as we're educated post-European Enlightenment educated, even if we've got our own cultures. But we all share that common, more kind of materialist culture. But for the first time, all of this was accessible. But you couldn't practice it in the old forms. Some people can do that. I couldn't. I would quite like to have been a Tibetan, but I couldn't be one. I just couldn't be one. I wouldn't have minded being a Japanese and practicing in that sort of way. I found it very, very beautiful. But it sort of didn't really speak to me fully. And so what Bhante did, what Sangharakshita did, was take from all the traditions, recognizing the value in all the traditions, and distill from it a practicable approach that we are all engaged with now, and that is going to unfold from us into the future. You will be taking it forward in your various ways so that it's enriched, more multiform, more accessible to more people from more different backgrounds, more different temperaments, and taking into account new climes and territories, as it were. So that is one of the functions of the Guru, is to take the essence of the tradition, the traditions in our case, that they've inherited, and to make of them a practicable whole. It's never complete, it's capable of evolution, it must evolve, because circumstances evolve, but it evolves from there. It's as if the light is, as it were, compressed in the lens, and then again fans out. So that's the function that Bhante performed. That is a guru function, as well as being able in his personal communication to wake people up. So what's happened to that? What's happened to that function of being able to wake people up? Well, the way I put that is it's sort of diffused amongst us. None of us have the stature of Sangharakshita. He was an extraordinary man. I knew him very well. Well, I knew him very well from a certain point of view, because he was such a multifaceted character, and rather a complex character, actually. It's quite difficult to know the whole man. It's very difficult to know the whole anybody, isn't it? But especially in somebody of such extraordinary intelligence and sensitivity and awareness, it's very difficult to know them fully. So many of us did meet him, but you'll find that there's a different Bhante for each and every one of us. And Bhante is somewhere at the point, where we all look at him, as it were, somewhere there and more. But none of us are like that. I'm used to be sort of thinking I should be like Bhante, but I came to think, okay, it's not going to happen. Not this lifetime, anyway. I can at least try to, in these terms, realise the nature of my mind. But I'm never going to be able to manifest that in the way that he did in this life. Maybe in several lifetimes in the future. In the Mahayana terms, niyutis, kotis of yojanas in the future. But yes, that sort of spirit is diffused amongst us as Kalyana Mitrata. It's the spirit of Kalyana Mitrata, that through our interaction with each other, in our connection with the tradition that has been distilled for us by our own founding teacher, we are in contact with the Guru principle. So that the Guru principle is not, we're not looking for our Guru. Well, you can do, it's up to you, of course. But I don't think you're going to find that amongst us. In a way, it's almost better that you don't. I remember Sangharakshita saying that the Tibetans considered that you could sort of project the ideal onto human beings, images, and that is the physical images, statues and paintings, and on imagined images. And he said, I think it's better to avoid the human being. And he said, wait till they're dead. You can see the point, because if you project that onto a living human being, well, at some point, either you're going to come up against your delusion, or they're going to, as it were, disappoint you. So, yes, it's better to look for Kalyana Mitras, people who've got more experience in the Dhamma than you. They may not be better than you in every respect. You may be better than them in some respects. They may have their faults. In fact, I think I go so far as to say they will have their faults. But you recognise that they have maybe some deeper experience of the Dhamma than you do. They've got some deeper experience of how to practice the Dhamma than you do. And they may disappoint you insofar as they don't seem to exemplify that sufficiently, but still you can gain something from them. And so we don't look for gurus amongst us in that absolute sense. We look for its sort of diffusion throughout our community. That principle is now present amongst us within our community. Some of us have been at it for a very, very long time, and maybe some of us have got a greater depth of realization of the Dhamma. Maybe. We don't have a special sort of sash that it represents guruhood or attainment. Please, may we never have that sort of thing. And we don't declare that. In fact, it's considered rather bad manners in Buddhism to declare that you've gained insight or anything like that, for very good reasons, because it's easy then for others to project and for you to think that because you've got insight, everything you do is perfect. You can walk on water, and any mistake you make is simply your skillful means. Terrible delusions. So that guru principle is present, but it's present, as it were, diffused amongst us. It comes to us through that function of Bhante, Ugyen Sangharakshita, and it's continued through our practicing the Dhamma as he presented it, which is simply the Buddha's teaching. It's simply Guru Padmasambhava's teaching. But it's made in a form, it's been put into a form that is relevant for us and is practicable for us. So when we're celebrating the life of Guru Padmasambhava, we're celebrating that principle. And we're celebrating it not merely as something that happened 800 years ago. No, my maths is hopeless. 1,200 years ago in Tibet, and is now gone, so to speak, or that we can only access if we get a teacher who is, so to speak, in that lineage. Actually, Sangharakshita was in that lineage. But we recognise that it's something that's present amongst us now, that important function of distilling the teaching in a way that is accessible for us has been performed for us, and that principle is now embodied in the whole order and the whole movement. And if we engage with it, we will come to go beyond our own limited understanding of who we are. We will gradually stop identifying ourselves so much with conditioned phenomena. We'll begin to experience the nature of awareness. We'll experience awareness as something that is always free. Awareness is something that is always blissful, that is always compassionate. And then we will be able to communicate that to others. And this great tradition that we've inherited from again Sangharakshita, from Guru Padmasambhava, and ultimately from the Buddha, will continue on to future generations. So you can see why it's important to celebrate Guru Padmasambhava. You could say, in a sense, there's nothing more important than this distillation of the teaching and this creation of a stream of Kalyana Mitrata. Thank you.
Well, firstly, thank you, Subhuti. It was lovely you remembering that point that you were sitting there and Bhante was sitting here, and the effect that that had on you at the time, and actually on the community. And I was just sitting here at the end, just feeling very moved by the whole talk, because it really sort of broadens our understanding of what we're part of. You know, we're part of this great, lineage that goes all the way back from the Buddha, that is then animated by individuals along the way through this. I like the way you describe the lightning rod earthing itself through particular individuals who then befriends and is a guru, or founds or reignites the tradition in a way that we can then do something with it in our actual individual lives. And then we then have the chance to befriend others through our own realisation to whatever level that is. And then it continues. So I don't know who's going to be sitting here and there in the next 50, 100 years, but it really did for me show that we're part of something quite mysterious, going all the way back to the Buddha. And it's a very alive tradition that needs people, ordinary people. It needs your founders and your gurus, and it needs ordinary people, ordinary practitioners to bring it alive as well in different ways. And I think you've been that for us. You've been a practitioner, sincere practitioner, who's actually brought Bhante's teachings alive in different ways for us, so we can practice it as you've done this week with us. So thank you for being a spiritual friend to many of us here, for making the teachings of Bhante really accessible to us, for then also tapping into the transcendental principle through Padmasambhava and for all the other teachers of the past. Thank you very much. You'll be heading off to Wales, back to the mountains or the hills, in a couple of days' time, and we really invite all of us here to send Subhuti on his way, by in a good way, through sharing, giving really. We've got a dana bowl is going to be outside. And anything you want to give to support Subhuti in his work. He does this, he comes to visit us all because of friendship. He's not paid to do this, as it were. He does it because of friendship, because of his connection with the centre, and because he wants to benefit the world through the Dharma. So if you have the opportunity today, have the means today, please do give. And it will continue serving Subhuti and the Dharma and us in different ways. So thank you very much. And we're back here at 7 o'clock. Thank you very much for coming, and thank you online as well.